Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on September 26, 2024. All managers are present. Manager Hejmati attending remotely, so we will be taking all of our votes by roll call this evening. So first to call attendance, Manager Hejmati.
It's on mute.
I'll come back. Manager Maxwell.
Here.
Manager Olson.
Present.
Manager Miller.
Here.
Manager Sando.
Here.
Manager Loftus.
Here.
Manager Hejmati. He'll join us shortly, I'm sure. And Manager White here. We have a quorum. First item of business is whether there's a member of the public here who wants to speak to the board on a matter that's not on the agenda. Then I'll look for a motion for approval of the agenda. Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando. Voting on the approval of the agenda, Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Sando.
Aye.
Loftus.
Aye.
Hejmati.
Aye.
And White, aye. Thank you. On our consent agenda tonight, we have approval of the minutes of the September 12th meeting, approval of the check registers for the general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers, and one resolution, 24053, to change the December 5th meeting to December 3rd to accommodate the Minnesota Watershed's annual meeting. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager
Second.
Olson, Manager Maxwell, second. On a consent agenda, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Olson?
Aye.
Miller?
Aye.
Sando?
Aye.
Loftus?
Aye.
Hejmati?
Aye.
And White, aye. Thank you. I do have a couple of meetings to report on. The 325 Blake Road liaisons got together here and had a work session. That's on the agenda, so I won't go into that. But Managers Maxwell and Hejmati and I were there. And this morning, Commissioner Edelson and her staff came out to the boardwalk. We were able to spend about an hour walking around and talking about the breadth of projects in that region of the creek, and able to give her some information about our climate action framework. She has said that, pointed out that District 6, her district, has the most water in many of the commission districts. So water is going to be a real theme or a real important point for her, which is a great thing. Manager Miller, can you report on the Policy and Planning Committee?
We had an introduction of the process for the developing the 10-year plan, and was very robust discussion, and we're looking forward to the next phase.
That'll be great. And of course, we got 3 new staff members introduced also. Manager Hejmati, can you report on the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting?
Certainly, the theme of the advisory of the CAC meeting was cart management, and our and staff presented what we've been doing and some of the work that has been done, some of the results that have come together, working across the state. And the discussion was very lively as usual. The CDC folks who are part of the CAC are very engaged and very bright and knowledgeable. And so they did a wonderful job in certainly helping me get different perspectives on the way things, on the things that we are doing. So as usual, it is a very productive meeting.
Thank you. Our upcoming meeting and event schedule is in the agenda. I'll point out that we have the Minnesota Watershed's quarterly meeting on October 15th with Manager Hejmati as a liaison, and our usual round of committee and board meetings. We'll now move to the public hearing, item 10.1. This is the Greenway to Cedar Trail Connection and Stream Bank Restoration public hearing. Mr. Sherman presenting.
Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. I'll be presenting both on the public hearing for the Greenway to Cedar Trail Connection and Stream Bank Restoration Project, and then moving right into project ordering. This presentation will encompass both agenda items 10.1 and 11.1. For the benefit of members of the public who are here, I've front-loaded the project background into the first part of the presentation to give everyone an overview of what we're talking about. And then we will move into recapping feasibility results, an overview of all the partnerships that are necessary for the project, the procedure for noticing this meeting and comments received, and then opening it up for a public comment period before moving into project ordering.
Thank you.
Just to situate this project, if you see the blue star kind of halfway down Minnehaha Creek in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, that's the rough location of this project within the city of St. Louis Park. And this project is part of the broader Minnehaha Creek Greenway work that we've been pursuing as a district since around 2009. And the broader Greenway is a series of projects that, let's see, do I have the ability to mute? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. A series of projects with municipal and private partners in the highly urbanized corridor between roughly West 34th Street and Meadowbrook Lake. And the work is occurring in the cities of Hopkins and St. Louis Park. And the combined goal of all of this work is to address downstream water quality at Lake Hiawatha and quantity issues up and down the Minnehaha.
Excuse me, Gabe.
Yep.
Where's the division between Hopkins and St. Louis Park?
Well, let me see if I can get a pointer.
Manager Miller, it's designated by that brown line. Right here.
Yeah, thank you.
So right at the eastern border of 325 Lake Road, right where it crosses the rail of the creek.
Okay, so this is entirely in St. Louis Park?
Yes, this project is entirely within St. Louis Park, but being coordinated with, Hopkins is well aware of the project since, as I'll discuss, it does tie closely into 325 Blake Road.
Thank you.
And around 2012, this conceptual design for the broader Greenway was developed to stitch together the series of projects that were already underway, as well as looking upstream and downstream a bit to expand the potential footprint of the Greenway. We've often talked about 325 Blake Road, which is the triangle parcel roughly in the middle of the screen, as being the final project to complete the core of the Greenway. The Greenway to Cedar Regional Trail connection is the final pedestrian and bicycle connection that actually stitches that all together. And with the installation of this trail connection, there'll be seamless pedestrian and bike connection from Methodist Hospital all the way up through the Minnehaha Creek Preserve under the new Southwest Light Rail bridges and up to 325 Blake Road and Cottageville Park. And we'll separately be working on a trailhead connection at 325 Blake Road. So we'll be using a small section of the regional trail to kind of bridge between our projects downstream and upstream of the light rail corridor. While we're in there, we'll also take this as an opportunity to do some stream bank stabilization and look at the riparian area to see if there's any ecological enhancements that would make sense as we do our trail work. So moving into feasibility, this is just an aerial view of the same area that we were looking at. As you can see, the project area is quite constrained on both sides, both for the creek and for the trail. For the creek, this is a historically ditched area. You can tell it's quite straight once you get downstream of the rail lines. And you can see how close the urban edge is to that. So there's not really any room to re-meander the creek in this section like we did down at the Minnehaha Creek Preserve. And so that's kind of why we're talking about looking really at bank stabilization and what can we do to prevent further erosion and damage to this section. We don't really have a lot of room to do major major re-meander project here. Similarly, there's quite a small footprint for the trail to be placed, and there's some steep banks, and there's some private, there's a mix of private and city-owned parcels that we'll be working with to align that trail. Even though we're just moving towards design right now, some of these discussions have been in the works for over a decade. And so back around 2012 or 2013, the Watershed District and the City of St. Louis Park had conversations with Met Council to ensure that as the light rail bridges were designed, adequate space would be maintained to eventually bring a trail underpass from our work down at Methodist in the preserve upstream. It was agreed that as the old bridge came out, they maintained the old abutment, which also had the benefit of maintaining the profile of Minnehaha Creek where it existed and not changing that flow regimen. It also, between the old abutment and the new abutment, sufficient space was left to put down a 10-foot wide pedestrian and bicycle trail, which is the standards that St. Louis Park likes to maintain for maintenance and user friendliness. A few years later, around 2015 and 2016, discussions were also entered with the one major private property owner who we'll be working with to place the trail. That's Professional Instruments Company, and I just quickly, that's this parcel right here. It's a commercial property, and we've continued conversations with them, and I'll detail our relationship with them as well. Those initial discussions also resulted in a very first engineering feasibility study that was conducted by the Met Council and Kimberly Horn at the time, with input from Wenck, now Stantec. And two different, this is just showing one, but two different potential trail alignments were identified through that work. And that's kind of what we have been working off of since about 2015 or so, until 2022 and 2023, as we started to kick off the project from our end with substantial completion of the Southwest Light Rail in that particular area. So there's delays at various points in the corridor, but all the bridges where we're talking about have been constructed. And so we largely now know what the final conditions are going to look like, which is significantly different than it looked prior to construction, just based on the impacts of all the heavy machinery, of course, several new and revamped bridges. So in 2022 and 2023, we undertook an updated and much more detailed feasibility study that would serve as the basis for future engineering and design efforts. And getting that additional level of detail was also crucial for having much more specific conversations with project partners, so that we were talking about conditions that actually exist on the ground in 2023 and 2024. I presented this back in June of 2023, the detailed feasibility results. I'm not going to go through all of the details, but just as a reminder to the board, similar to the first feasibility study, we looked at two different potential trail alignments. They were different than had been proposed in the previous feasibility study. Not majorly so, but a lot more detail was added. And we looked at a lot of different considerations, including potential speed limit, the length and sinuosity of the trail, sort of user experience through how scenic versus utilitarian the trail connection would be. Spent a lot of time working with St. Louis Park, understanding their maintenance needs, making sure that we provided both vertical and horizontal clearance for their snow plows and any sort of summer maintenance that would be required. And then looked carefully at floodplain fill and impacts to private properties. And of course, as we're doing our work, we're focused on improving the ecological integrity of these areas and minimizing any negative impacts we have. So that was an area, we looked very closely at any floodplain impacts that we would be having. One of the alignments, the 12 mile per hour alignment, had smaller floodplain impacts that actually allowed us to mitigate and compensate for lost storage all on public property. And so again, that kind of fit within our goals of minimizing impacts to private property and doing as much work as we can on parcels that are already owned by the city. In addition to the trail work, we also looked at areas of the stream bank that would benefit from restoration. There are sort of two categories of that work, and you can see in the yellow here the two sort of areas most upstream. Those are areas of the bank that would need to be restored as part of the trail construction itself. So making sure that we're not going to be damaging slopes that would increase erosion and that sort of thing. The green area downstream of the yellow, we call it alternate one, so that work is not strictly necessary from a engineering standpoint to build the trail, but it makes sense while we're mobilized in that area to do as much stream bank restoration work as we can. And so we included looking at stabilizing that portion of the stream, any sort of vegetation management that would be helpful, clearing out buckthorn and looking at native plantings there, and just trying to restore as much health to a pretty ditched and historically degraded section of the stream as possible within a narrow footprint. The other thing that we got out of the updated feasibility study was an updated opinion of probable cost. And I'm presenting what the preferred approach coming out of feasibility was. So staff recommendation, which the board agreed with back in June, which would be looking at the base bid, which is all the work necessary to build the trail, plus rolling in that additional stream bank restoration work to get that ecological benefit. And we carried forward an engineer's estimate of $884,000 for both those pieces of work. We also recommended looking at basically a hybrid alignment to maximize the benefits of both the 12 mile per hour and 16 mile an hour options. Upstream of the bridges, we recommended continuing with the 12 mile per hour alignment, which you see in the yellow. That allowed us to stay on public property. And we were able to work through with the city of St. Louis Park, their engineering and operations maintenance people, to understand the turning radii that were needed to make sure, again, that even in the tightest spots, they could run their maintenance vehicles. And through design, we'll be looking at exactly the alignment that we want to pursue downstream of the bridges. And there's some of the considerations there are impacts to the professional instruments company, private property, as well as balancing tree removals with user experience. So understanding the trade-offs between how close do we swing the trail to the stream for sort of maximum scenic enjoyment versus preserving the trees and maybe swinging users a little bit closer to the roads and trails and sidewalks that already exist. And again, those will be considerations through the detailed design process that we'll be entering into soon. I also wanted just to take a moment to actually have a separate conversation around partnerships, since there are several key partnerships for this project. First and foremost is the City of St. Louis Park. They're not only supportive of the project, they have also been, they've also identified this as a priority project in their own planning capital planning documents. So St. Louis Park has a transportation initiative called Connect the Park, which identifies non-motorized transportation, basically little missing connections in trails and sidewalks that if they were implemented could really improve the overall non-motorized transportation network in the city. This trail connection is identified in that planning document, and it's also been carried in the out years of the city's CIP. And I'll explain in a bit more detail, but they're planning, in conjunction with our work, they'll be moving the project into the active years of their CIP when they revisit that in December. Hennepin County, we've dealt with in two capacities for this project. HICRA, which is their regional rail authority, owns some of the rail corridor there where the trail will run. So we've worked with them understanding ownership and land rights there. More recently, we applied for and secured a Community Works grant from Hennepin County for $200,000, and this was recently before the board as a consent item to approve that agreement. This grant is really focused on the transportation aspect, so it'll be covering a portion of the trail construction, not the ecological work. Metropolitan Council is obviously in charge of the Southwest Light Rail, or Southwest Light Rail Transit project. While that work is undergoing, they're solely in charge of all the activity that takes place within the corridor. So we've been coordinating with them for access agreements. So some of those access agreements will eventually revert to other owners, potentially Hennepin County and Three Rivers, but for now we've been coordinating those agreements with the Metropolitan Council. Three Rivers Park District, again, those they operate and maintain the regional trail there. After Southwest Light Rail is complete, they may regain ownership over the trail. That's the likely scenario. In the meantime, we're coordinating all that work again with Met Council, but we have been coordinating with Three Rivers on the actual design of the trail tie-in. So understanding that we're coming in with the right approach angle, and that all the safety considerations have been factored in for how we create a new trail intersection, which Three Rivers is they're very keen in understanding anytime someone attaches to the regional trail, since there are higher speeds on that. And then finally, moving on to the private side, I mentioned Professional Instruments Company. We've been working on a draft agreement with them to understand during our construction process how we might be able to stage on their property a coordination process during design, so that we can go back to them a few times and make sure that, as a neighbor to the trail, that they're understanding exactly what we're proposing to do. And then the final agreement will also reflect a sale or transfer of a small portion of the Professional Instruments parcel that our trail needs to clip. And so again, through our feasibility study, we've sort of minimized the footprint that we need to encroach on private property, but in this particular case, for historical reasons, the parcel boundary was drawn very, very close to Minnehaha Creek, so there's no real way to completely avoid that.
How big is the parcel?
Well, that'll be decided through design, but it's on the order of, the tens to hundreds of square feet. And then finally, there are a few residential properties that we don't need to impact with the trail, but there might be some additional ecological benefits. This would be on the other side of the creek from the trail. If we were able to do some work on their stream bank, we might gain some ecological benefit, but that would be something to be figured out working with each of those individual property owners as we get into design. But we have a viable design without needing to do that. So that was where we left feasibility and where the partnerships stand. In preparation for this public hearing, I just wanted to note how we noticed this, and then comments that were received. So we, as required, ran 2 public notices in the Minnesota Star Tribune. The first ran on September 9th and the second on September 16th. We also sent an email to our county, municipal, and other partner agencies on September 13th, and then we conducted a postcard mailing to all addresses within 1,000 feet of the project boundaries, which exceeds our statutory requirement, but that's been our recent practice for capital projects. In addition to all those addresses, we reached out specifically to 2 apartment complexes that are basically within 1,000 feet. That would be Chorus Apartments and Creekwood Estate Apartments. And we got in touch with their with their property managers, sent them a digital version of this postcard to distribute to the individual residences there, since sometimes those are missed with a broad postcard mailing. We did receive 1 phone call inquiry and comment from a neighbor of the project, and they requested that a comment be read into the record. So I could do that either now or once we open it up on the next slide to public comment.
I'd say go ahead and do it now.
Sure. There's an anonymous comment from a resident in St. Louis Park, noting that they had concerns with public safety in the general area and wanted the watershed district to be aware. And with that, I could turn it to you, President White, to open the floor to the public comment period.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Anyone who wishes to speak about this can come forward. And when you do, sit at the desk here in the front and say your name and address before you begin.
Hi, I'm Margaret Sullivan, and my husband and I own one of the properties that will be affected by this.
Can you state the address?
7837 Edgebrook Drive,
Thank you.
no problem. So anyway, we have an embankment wall, which we have told Gabe that's fine to think of changing how that affects the creek, because it's not something that is that attractive for the creek or for its natural preservation. But the thing that concerns me, and I was talking to a gentleman before I decided to make a comment, is once that wall is down and we have a rain like we did this year, I assume there is a process that makes sure that the house wouldn't be flooded. And it's up the hill, but I mean, all of a sudden it opens up this entire bank, and my imagination hasn't completed what that would look like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Question?
Yes.
As I'm looking at the curve on the north side of the tracks, your house is across from that curve?
Oh, you gotta understand, I'm dyslexic.
I
And so
just-
it always makes it hard. Our house is the first house next to the water main. If that makes any sense to you.
Yeah,
This is tough because it's in the summer, so it's all vegetated.
It's,
One of the previous slides
yeah.
showed the water main.
yeah,
This
it's the
is
city water, the big, and so our house is at the very end of Edgebrook, before you go up the hill, by the creek.
okay.
And so we were unfortunate enough to have a big ash tree fall this year.
Mhm.
And in the process noticed, because of all this rain, how spongy it was around the area of the ash tree, and I thought, help me understand. This is what my question is, help me understand how that all works.
Okay. Mr. Sherman, do you want to respond?
Yes, so, right now, so there's a cinder block, I believe, retaining wall,
Yes,
yeah, that forms the embankment. We've explored the idea, and it's failing, or it's, in some places, or it's in rough shape, and some,
and some, well, where the tree fell.
definitely where the tree fell, yeah.
Where the tree fell, it kind of went like that on the retaining wall,
Yeah.
which is what was right next to the rocks that were there.
Yeah,
But yes, the rest of it still looks pretty decent.
yeah,
And so we're not objecting to this, I'm just trying to understand
yeah.
more what it will look like.
And so what we've talked about in general terms, and again, this would be something that we've, as we scope out design, we would look at in detail, would be removing the block retaining wall and doing a more gradual grade, and vegetating that with, plantings that would hold the naturalized bank in place, and still, provide, ultimately the grades, impacting your property wouldn't really change. It's just we're going from an abrupt retaining wall to a more gradual slope up.
Okay.
And so that would all be, we did some early engagement with, just with a few properties where our feasibility study showed, well, there might be some benefit if we looked across the creek. Really to understand, again, it was not necessary for the construction of the trail.
Right.
So the idea was if there was interest from the residential owners, if they had retaining walls that maybe were damaged or coming to the end of their life, maybe there would be some sort of mutual benefit where, as part of our project, we would be paying to naturalize that area and still make sure that we're providing the same amount of protection to the properties, just in a way that was
Yep.
more naturalized, essentially.
So when the time comes, there would be examples or mock-ups you could show to
Definitely,
the property?
And we'll do something similar where, we've, when we've met with these owners, come with whatever the latest drawings that we have, kind of look, match those drawings up with what we're seeing on the landscape and talking through the various options.
Mhm.
Great.
So there'll be, in addition to the kind of formal public engagement points, which we're going to be working out with the city of St. Louis Park, we'll be making special effort to, come and have individual conversations with any property owners, including the commercial property owner we're, in very good contact with as well.
When might those conversations be ripe?
I would say, in the next couple months, we'd be wanting to engage kind of
Okay.
on the
That's what, yeah.
on the early end of design, and then as we get to each stage in the design process, as drawings get updated, we would come back with the next iteration and make sure that it's still seeming like something.
We inherited the wall, we did not build the wall.
Well, thank you so much for coming, I appreciate that very much.
No problem, I'm very happy to hear what's all happening, because the creek does need some help. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to come forward? Then I'll close the public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Sherman. We'll move to the next phase.
All right, so this will be item 11.1, ordering of the Greenway to Cedar Trail Connection Spring Bank Restoration Project. Since I already covered the project background and feasibility in some detail, under the previous agenda item, we'll really be focusing on project ordering here. And I'll be laying out a project timeline of how we got to this point and some immediate next steps. Everything that you're seeing here in gray has sort of already happened. We discussed the initial feasibility study back in 2015, 2016, the updated feasibility study, which was finished in 2023 and brought to the board in June of 2023. And then most recently in June, when we approved an agreement with Hennepin County for receiving grant funds. coordinated with the City of St. Louis Park in advance of this evening. The city passed a resolution of support for the project at their September 9th council meeting, and I'll detail out what's in that resolution in just a moment. This evening, we're ordering the project, which would allow us to come at the next board meeting on October 10th with a proposed design contract. That would allow us to kick off design and community engagement at the end of 2024 and continuing out through the bulk of 2025. Also, around the first quarter of 2025, we would be revisiting some of the project agreements. Again, I'll touch on that in a moment. And if everything goes perfectly to plan, we could see construction as early as the end of 2025, but more likely starting in early 2026. And we would be looking at probably if there's any necessity for winter work, whether or not we're pushing things to start during that season, or if that can all take place during warm conditions.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm just going to highlight a few key milestones here. On September 9th, as I mentioned, St. Louis Park passed a resolution of support. Broadly, like any of those, it states that St. Louis Park shares the same vision for and supports the project as proposed in the feasibility study. More specifically, it authorized the district to access city-owned parcels within the project area to perform surveys and other investigations to support design. Although the city can't officially memorialize its cost share until a project is placed into its CIP, the resolution of support also signals the city's intention to contribute half the cost of the trail. So that would not be including the smaller amount that's for pure restoration work, but any portion of the trail that isn't covered by the Hennepin County grant would be split 50-50 between the watershed district and the city. It also signals the intention for the city to allow construction of the project on city-owned parcels, and then when the time comes, to directs city staff to enter into agreements and other easements and maintenance coordination with the district as design progresses. Looking at the design, so we completed the feasibility study in 2023. That was conducted by Stantec with Interfluve as a subconsultant. And in addition to the drawings, also there was some floodplain modeling done, as I noted before. We also worked closely with the city to incorporate city-specific maintenance standards into that design, and really got buy-in from the city on their comfort with the approach that the Stantec team is taking, and signaled their comfort with that design process. In order to move things along as quickly as possible, coming out of feasibility and after some subsequent discussions, we worked to draft a potential design scope of work with Stantec that, again, incorporated specific feedback from the city, so that we have, even though we're running the design process, it's really leading towards a trail that will ultimately be taken over for ownership and maintenance by the city. So we intend to bring forward that draft scope of work at the October 10th board meeting, and staff would recommend proceeding with the Stantec and Interfluve team at that time, really to allow us, we could kick off design within a matter of weeks, rather than a potentially lengthy process to further test the market on that. But that will be brought to the board for its consideration at the next board meeting. Finally, I mentioned a series of draft agreements that are in the works. A lot of that we're sort of waiting on some design details to be worked out before we can actually ink an agreement, but we have a draft agreement with the city. It's fairly well fleshed out, but the city is not able to enter into any project-specific agreements until the project again is in their CIP. So we'll pick up those discussions in January of 2025 after CIP approval. We'll need a project agreement with Professional Instruments Company. Again, we have a draft agreement with them that's quite detailed, but we'll want to understand what the city agreement looks like, since there's a lot of interplay between the city's obligations and any sort of obligations that the district and Professional Instruments would have towards each other are tied up with what the city will allow on its property. As we just discussed, we are working with several private homeowners. If designs progress and everyone agrees that it's mutually beneficial to pursue joint work, at that time we would negotiate an agreement that again established obligations to and from the watershed district and those private owners. Right now we don't have any draft agreements. Everything has just been conducted through conversations at this point. Finally, we have several agreements, access agreements in draft form with Metropolitan Council that would allow us to construct and ultimately maintain, or for the city to maintain a trail that snakes onto Southwest Light Rail property. And we'll be using the ordering of this project to kind of get some momentum towards finalizing those agreements that have been in draft form. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or can move towards a vote from the board on Resolution 24-054, ordering of the Greenway to Cedar Trail Connection Stream Bank Restoration Project.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. I have a motion from Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Questions or comments for Mr. Sherman? Manager Maxwell?
The lady and gentleman that have the property, are the two houses next to it? Because you said there was three projects. Are they connected? I mean, all one? So it's gonna be one big picture when they get done with it. It's not gonna be like, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. It'll be one bigger picture, it'll all look alike.
That will be one of the discussions actually that we'll have to bring to the board. So I was going to note that since you brought it up, in addition to making sure that it's beneficial and wanted by the homeowners, the board will have to decide whether or not the expense of doing that work is worth the return. I think that will be one consideration is if only one of the homeowners is willing and wanting the project, are we going to get enough benefit from doing just one section of retaining wall removal, or is that something that needs to be
Broader.
done all at once? And so that will be something that we work through with the designer to understand the benefits of that.
All right, good. And then one other one, you talked about the city of St. Louis Park doing the maintenance.
Yeah.
But then you also talked about the Three Rivers doing the maintenance.
Yep.
Where is it, who oversees who, and does it, Three Rivers take it over completely? Because in Hopkins, I know they do that. Three
Yes.
Rivers does the parks, or the trails.
So my working understanding right now is the connection that we're building is, would be owned and maintained by the city, and that would be up to where it connects into the regional trail, and then the regional trail maintenance is conducted by
Three
Rivers, and wherever that delineation is with the city of Hopkins.
So there's a stopping point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Manager
I
Olson?
just didn't want to collide down the same street.
Okay, when you, in that curve of on the north side of the tracks, is any of that trail currently, is all of the 10-foot wide trail over solid ground right now, or is there something that has to be repaired back into the creek?
Your question is, are we gonna have to grade into the creek?
Exactly.
So we're gonna be trying to minimize that, and Chris could also speak to the specifics, but here you can see, when we talk about minimizing our impacts, the pink lines extend further into the creek and would have more.
I'm more concerned on the other side.
On the other
track.
side, sorry, yes.
Yep.
So we'll be Over here, we will be building on solid ground.
Got it. Okay.
We did, back through feasibility, explore the option of a bridge or concrete boardwalk solution, but those were on the order of, almost, it was sort of double the cost of the entire project, and so we opted to focus on keeping the turning radius as tight as possible.
Correct. And then the guardrail, can you define what that means? What do you have as a concept for a guardrail?
Yes, some sort of like, so we've understood, as I was talking about it, people who are coming from the regional trail and connecting down onto the connection will be going downhill and picking up some speed. And so through the feasibility study we talked about, right at that curve, there is a potential safety concern.
Okay.
We haven't designed that'll come through design what the actual guardrail looks like. We also want to make sure that whatever we install is not more dangerous than nothing. We don't want people going high speed into a solid barrier. So those will be, again, conversations that we have with the city. Maybe they have precedents for how they've dealt with their sort of local trail system before. But that's definitely a significant consideration as far as safety.
Yeah, I'm not interested in seeing bicycles in the creek.
Yeah.
Okay. You have a creek access on the south side of the tracks, really close to the bridge. What is the purpose of that? In one of the drawings I had, it said creek access.
That may have been for construction, if I'm recalling correctly.
Okay. It's not a canoe access or some sort of...
No, I'm guessing, I'm just trying to think through the drawings that we would have had posted. I'm guessing that was, one of the big things that we're looking at here is how to stage construction.
Okay.
And whether or not we need to be on private property to access, to do the creek work, or if that can be done from.
That was my concern, because if people are coming off the creek on their canoes and they're in that company's
we're not
parking lot.
formalizing, we'll look at, if maybe a bench or potentially a picnic table somewhere makes sense as sort of a park amenity, but we're not looking to formalize building access.
Okay, and in my mind, when Margaret was talking about her wall, the shoreline repair work that we've done in vast distances on Lake Minnetonka is similar to what you have in mind on her shore, where moving water is held at bay by our work.
Essentially that'd be the concept is, it would probably be over several seasons. We'd have some sort of stabilization in place while vegetation grew to ultimately secure that. But that'd be something that the engineers look at in detail, is understanding exactly how the water is flowing through that.
Right, because
area.
our citizens in Wayzata prefer a natural-looking shoreline.
Yeah.
Even though it's armor-plated, it looks like it's part of nature. So they don't like platinum walls and all the sheet piling and whatever else.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so, and the last question. Regarding the repairs on the north side of the creek, which would be in her yard area, would you put that in the same budget? Would that be a watershed budget item for the north side of the creek, or would it be part of the whole project budget?
That would become part of the watershed budget.
A separate budget?
Yeah, so right now, this probable cost I have up here, the 884, includes the work that we knew we would be able to do if the board wanted. So that was the additional restoration work kind of downstream. So if we did decide to explore doing work on the north side, that would be a separate discussion and a separate budget for that work. And the city of St. Louis Park would not likely participate in that part of the work because it's not the trail.
That's the answer to my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because they're committed to 200,000.
Sorry, so the 200,000 that's the grant that we received from Hennepin County.
Oh, I thought you said St. Louis Park before.
St. Louis Park will be splitting the remaining,
Okay.
whatever's left over.
Yeah, okay, I think.
So that was a benefit to the city of St. Louis Park. We essentially defrayed their portion of the project by $100,000 if we're splitting.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Manager Sando?
Yes, is this project walkable now along the creek?
I would not encourage it. We've been
really-
down there.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not.
we've been down there. As a project team, we have walked it. Even in proper footwear, it's difficult. Made a bit more difficult. One of the things that we discovered during this process was the corridor underneath the bridges itself. Large boulders were placed that weren't originally part of the specifications. That's something we'll have to remove to put in our trail.
Right.
So those are quite cumbersome to walk over. It's quite vegetated, very thick with buckthorn back there. So I think people do, we've heard they use the professional instruments company kind of property they go down into the woods into the creek, but it's definitely not an area that is encouraged for that. It's not right now maintained by the city.
And then is there a target project completion date or goal?
We would be looking to hopefully have construction finished sometime in 2026.
Anything else? All right, then, voting by roll call to adopt the resolution. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Aye.
Manager Loftus. Aye. Manager Hidmati.
Aye.
Manager White says aye. Thank you very much, Mr. Sherman, and thanks for coming to us. We now have a discussion item, which is the County Road 6 pond. Ms. Cermak.
All right, good evening, President White, Board of Managers. I'm here tonight with just a discussion item to bring an update, a 60% update regarding the County Road 6 pond retrofit. This should be fairly familiar. We were in front of the committee just last month with a 30% update. So I'll keep the background fairly brief tonight. Recap for Board of Managers that weren't present at our 30% discussion of just some of the key design decisions we had made at that point, and then really focus the bulk of our time tonight on where we're at currently and really focus on some of the outstanding design decisions that remain. And then we'll close with what that means for upcoming work and our project schedule. All right. So as a reminder, our County Road 6 pond is an important part of our broader Long Lake Creek watershed strategy. We have it more recently highlighted in our Long Lake Creek roadmap, where we sought to establish management units and identify a suite of project area opportunities. Those opportunities were broken out into these 3 implementation buckets you see here, and we've called attention to prioritizing regional treatment opportunities in the near term. County Road 6 project is one of those regional stormwater opportunities. You can see kind of the sheer amount of volume that passes through this pond. In parallel to roadmap development, we also were monitoring the pond and saw results that indicated underperformance against its original design, kind of prompting us to explore feasibility to see if a cost-effective retrofit was available. So we did identify a stacked alternative approach through feasibility that we carried into design. That was the earthen berm. This is kind of the cartoon schematic here from early on, where we wanted to solidify that the berm and kind of create a more two-celled system and encourage some settling in that north cell. And then a bulk of the water quality reduction was coming from this gravity sand filter bench that would be placed in the south cell. We kicked off design in June this year, and some of the things we bridged from feasibility to design was the importance of trying to build our project within our existing property rights with our easement boundary shown here on the map. We also wanted to configure the project around our existing maintenance corridor off of County Road 6 and make sure we could maintain access all the way down to the weir, which is down in the south. And with all those kind of constraints together, we want to make sure that we're continuously optimizing kind of the elevations of both the berm and the filter bench for maximum phosphorus reduction. So that brings us to design. Just to recap again some of the major things that happened early on in our design work. A lot of data discovery work right off the bat, so trying to refine our understanding of what's actually out on the site. That includes, topology survey work, bathymetry surveys within the pond itself, identifying wetland boundaries. And we also decided to explore some filter options. Doing that through a team visit and site walk, our design charrette, to really explore, can it go up here? Can it go here? What will some of the drain tile features look like? So brainstorming that, we also did a kind of filter tour of filter benches in the metro area to really learn from folks on what's worked well and where they've had maybe some unexpected issues and how we could potentially mitigate for those issues with our design. On our filter tour, we were introduced to kind of various filter medias that folks were using. So we wanted to kind of gut check that the sand unvegetated media was the right fit for our project. We had communicated at 30% that the sand media was kind of the best fit for our project. So sticking with what we had intended through feasibility there. And we were able to roll that together for kind of our first initial kind of schematic layout at 30%. Some key things that we also refined at 30% was the decision to advance design of the berm. You'll recall that we decided to stack two alternatives together, so through feasibility we did not explore those two in conjunction. So making that decision to keep moving on the berm. We also started to narrow in the filter bench's general position. You can see here we started to shift it more into the pond footprint itself instead of kind of that upland area to allow that maintenance corridor to remain. And then...
Could you point it out?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so this kind of shows kind of where we want to keep that now maintenance corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Like a consistent 8-foot corridor. I just wanted to do a quick side-by-side from 30 to 60 just to show that we're not drastically changing the layout at the site. What we've really done from 30 to 60 is add a lot of detail in specific areas. I thought it'd be helpful to also walk through just the new function of our proposed project and how water is going to flow through the site. So again, water comes in from the north under County Road 6 in that northwest corner, where we're going to start to see additional settling in that northern cell from the addition and kind of strengthening of that berm. You'll notice some grading work in that northwest corner of how our berm ties in to the easement boundary. That's something we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail here. Then water will be kind of encouraged on this preferential flow path through the berm into the southern cell, where we'll see some additional settling in the south cell, but water will start to overtop and flow over onto our filter. Then the water will be draining vertically through that sand. That's what's giving us that additional water quality treatment into a drain tile system that you can see laid out here. The actual layout of the drain tile is something we're going to also kind of dive into as we're anticipating some potential changes there. You'll see the drain tiles are projected to outlet still within our easement boundary, and that water will flow south kind of through that wetland system there into the stream channel that's just downstream of the weir. And then lastly, we still want to maintain that overflow capability for the pond and have that water overtop the weir structure. We've learned a lot about the weir structure through design. Interestingly, the weir was not constructed to the elevations that we see present in our 1990s design memo and design sheet. Those old records indicate that we should have an overflow elevation of 952. and we have a 950.6 overflow elevation, so substantially lower than what some of our assumptions were in feasibility. So we're gonna spend some time talking about that today too. So again, we're gonna tick through kind of these 3 areas and kind of talk through those in a bit more detail. So let's start with the weir. The weir needs 2 modifications for the filter bench to function properly. First, we need to plug those low flow openings. So there's 5 kind of low flow openings across the weir that currently act as to kind of draw down the pond to that low flow normal water elevation. We want to plug those so that the filter bench can now be our new kind of normal flow, low flow outlet elevation. We also need to raise the elevation of the weir to its original design of 952. And that is extremely important for the project to be possible. So by raising it up to 952, we then can encourage that water to actually make it on top of our filter.
Exactly.
As it sits right now, the top of the weir is below the top of our filter bench. So we wouldn't really be seeing water actually get on top of the bench. We're still exploring how best to modify the weir. We've been kind of working through that as a team, various scenarios, so still rounding that out, and would plan to have much more kind of greater detail on the exact plan for that at 90%. This second kind of larger modification to the weir obviously wasn't something that we had anticipated and had eyes on during feasibility, so there is a budget consideration that we will that you'll see reflected in a minute here. And then lastly, relating to the weir, we are trying to consider kind of long-term O&M considerations. Ideally, we'd be able to draw down the pond on our own and not just rely on the low flow drainage, so that we could perform any maintenance activities we needed on the filter bench. So we're exploring kind of various options that would allow us to do that. Okay, so the drain tile system, you'll see we finally have kind of a layout of the pipework laid out. So again, this will be sitting kind of at the bottom of the sand media that's capturing the water that drains through the filter and bringing it downstream. For reference, right now we're planning on about a 4 inch diameter drain tile. So for reference, it's about the size of your coasters up there. So fairly small. We're still exploring the exact layout of how to lay out the drain tile. We are really constrained here with grade. And we need to make sure that we keep a little bit of slope on the drain tile pipes. So that's kind of some of our constraints we're working with. So you'll likely see that layout change, the amount of cleanouts change, and get refined as we move towards 90%.
How deep is that tile?
It ranges from 1 to 2 feet. I think we're aiming for 2 feet of sand, and then right on top of that drain tile piece is closer to, I think, 1.5 feet.
Is freezing a threat? Or the tile would pop?
That's a really good question, Manager Olson. We haven't talked about that as a team.
Mr. Mann?
Manager Olson, no, it won't be, because the drain tile essentially will be draining out the pond, so there won't be any water sitting in that system within the drain tile because of that.
So it naturally wants to stay empty?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Great question.
Oh, one other question on the tile. You have dashed or V's up there. What does that mean?
The dash fees.
Those,
Manager Olson, it's just a typical signal for a symbol for a storm sewer or a drain tile that is used in typical construction drawings. So the double arrow, single arrow would be typically like a sanitary line.
Okay.
So it's just, the double arrow is just a designation.
okay, so that's a continuous tile. It's just a designator, okay.
Yeah, and so these dots right now indicate where we would have a clean out structure.
Yeah.
So we have quite a few kind of mapped right now. What we want to make sure is, A, we maintain enough coverage so that we're keeping up with filtration. We also want cleanouts in places that allow us to flush the drain tile properly if it were to get clogged. This double dash line here, I just wanted to call out, that's one of the scenarios we're thinking about for drawing down the pond, so not a drain tile feature, but another like pipework element.
Thank you.
Okay, so northwest corner, I shouldn't have sat down. I wanted to be able to talk through this one. So, as we started kind of getting our existing conditions for the site and really turning our attention over here, we started looking at how the pond was originally constructed. There's some funky grading in the northwest corner that we think is just a result of us building the pond in the 90s and not having the ability to do earthwork outside our parcel, our easement boundary, which follows that parcel boundary here. What's interesting to note is how the pond functions currently. Under that 100-year elevation, we see our pond interact with that parcel, so outside of the pond's footprint. So we see that already. So originally our goal was to keep all of our earthwork and retrofits within our easement boundary. And so we explored, you'll see the schematic here, the opportunity to do that. This is not the optimal design. In order to keep all the earthwork on our side of the boundary and to meet proper slopes, we're really having to grade into the existing pond. So we're losing some storage and volume ability and really just lowering the efficacy of the pond. And we start to encroach on that inlet too, coming in. So we started to explore what it would look like under an ideal scenario. Kind of the medium ground option that we kind of refer to as our berm extension minimizes the amount of earthwork needed, where we're extending that 952 elevation berm to the existing 952 contour that you can see kind of shown there on the left. That would result in that berm extending and doing some earthwork outside of our property. As we explored that, we wanted to ask if we had a property owner that was willing to explore opportunities with us, what would be the ideal scenario for the project. And so our team workshopped this scenario here where we're actually expanding the pond footprint outside of our easement. Really based off kind of historic topology out here, this is probably how it should have been graded from the beginning. It really matches and smooths out the existing topology. Another benefit here is that we can more easily capture some roadside localized drainage that comes off of County Road 6 there and get that into the pond versus this low kind of wet spot that we have kind of created because of our pond. So obviously here a big consideration is the willingness of this neighbor. We have had some initial conversations with the Epleys who own that parcel there. They seem really open to exploring opportunities with us. They love the pond. I didn't point this out, but on the topology slide, their house sits about 50 feet up from the pond. So it's quite a steep slope there, and they don't really use and interact with this part of their property at all currently. So they seem open to talking through how to optimize that area of the property. And then we would from there explore, what their preferred scenario is and what type of agreement framework would best support that. So those conversations are in motion.
Would that be a permanent easement for us or a temporary?
We've kind of got a range of options that we've talked through with legal, and I think it depends on what's some of those scenarios that we land on. I think at a minimum what we'd like to do is get kind of a flowage easement or flowage acknowledgement that part of the property is probably going to get wetter from our project. Even though it currently already does interact, we just want to be mindful about the impacts we'd be making on the property. And then kind of the more extreme option, I guess, would be kind of a classical easement. So we're thinking through what kind of management would we need to do long term on that part. So we'll report back as we learn more. We've also been advancing some conversations with John Newell, the homeowner and property owner of where we have our easement. He's requested that we look into kind of a walking path that would be an amendment to our existing easement. This walking path is beneficial for staff just from a safety standpoint, where we would have a better place to access, kind of unload and access for maintenance, monitoring and inspections that would be done by foot. We still will need to maintain our existing kind of access as is to support any more substantial maintenance with utility vehicles and things like that. So we're kind of continuing those conversations, and if those progress, that would be something where we would bring in front of the board for your consideration.
Has the easement been executed?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes, good question.
Would you rather park in the cul-de-sac or out on the highway?
Close.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then lastly, but not least, we have, since 30% started initial conversations with our regulatory partners, DNR, Bowser, and Army Corps. So we'll be continuing to kind of have meetings with them and talk through some of these various project components. That northwest corner, getting some clarity there is going to help us kind of with our path forward for permits needed. So that's in good shape, and we'll keep the board apprised with that. And for our usual 90% design process, we bring kind of a formal permit overview as well for the board. Okay, so in feasibility, our project budget that stacked together both the filter bench and the earthen berm had us around $560,000. Unfortunately, because of our discrepancy that I mentioned earlier with our weir and just the degree of modifications that we have to make, we're seeing that jump in our project budget. I do want to note, we can't pursue the filter bench without the weir modification. We just don't have the grade out here to make this system work and to get the water on top of the weir. So right now we're factoring about $100,000 worth of modifications, and we have a healthy contingency built into that. So that's what's kind of driving the budget there. We have a lot of uncertainty on how exactly we're going to modify the weir. We want to make sure it's structurally sound when we're talking about holding, 1.5 foot more of water. So we're thinking about structure, of course the cost and kind of the best pathway there, and then also making sure that we're still encouraging water to go into the stream channel. So we have a lot to figure out there, and hopefully we'll see those numbers refined in the coming month. I also want to note though, this $710,000 budget does include that optimal northwest corner design, where we've expanded the pond footprint and done some more extensive grading in that northwest corner. So what that means for schedule and next steps. When I was in front of the board or committee in August, we had laid out a schedule that would get us to construction this winter. In order to make that happen, we needed to hit 60% design on September 26th, so we're here. But we also would need to turn around final design in 4 weeks at the end of October. And so because of some of the outstanding design decisions that we walked through tonight and wanting to take time to actually explore this opportunity in the northwest corner with the Epleys, we just can't physically get the project turned around to 90% in 4 weeks. So we'll be spending our time in the near term exploring these things here. So beyond what I've already mentioned, we are also conducting a pond dredging assessment. We had flagged early on a potential opportunity to kind of perform an early dredging with the pond, since we're going to have it dewatered and have equipment already mobilized. So we're assessing sediment contamination right now, and we'll have updated numbers on how that would kind of fold, that PMLM effort would fold into the project budget and kind of be a stacked effort there. So we'll continue our work on neighbor engagement and any agreements that are going to come along with that. Keep progress on our permitting conversations and permit applications. And then as part of our formal design process, we do host a public meeting near the project location. And we'll likely do that kind of once we get closer to 90%, so we have kind of solidified plans, and then we would bring the plans back to the board. And we're anticipating doing that this winter. We want to keep steady progress with the design team, keep things moving with the idea that we can have it ready and waiting and on the shelf and put it out for bid in the most kind of optimal bid period, which we're kind of thinking August, and then would position us to build in winter of 26. All right, that's what I have for an update. Happy to hop back to different slides.
Manager Miller?
What's the effectiveness of the current pond versus the proposed effectiveness of the new facility?
So feasibility and our monitoring data showed about a 30% effectiveness at removing TP. Our last projection still had us on kind of doubling that, so getting closer to 60% is what we're aiming for. We still need to do kind of a next wave of water quality modeling with these updated 60% plans. So I think we're still tracking in that ballpark. Our filter bench footprint is staying the same size from feasibility, so that's really important and one of kind of the key drivers for our reductions.
Thank you.
Manager Olson?
Could you go back one slide? We have repeatedly seen how up at the Red River Valley, they take out a dam and they put in boulders and a series of rapids, and it slows the water down and holds back the water, but it's very natural looking compared to the big wall that they used to have. If you see how the boulders are down in front here, could we hide that weir, add more metal, hide the weir behind boulders, and have our drainage go between the rocks where it strategically makes sense and make it look more natural?
President White, Manager Olson, good question. One thing that comes to mind that we kind of talked about is we don't want to create too much of a pooled approach. We see so many carp stack up at this site, so we have a natural barrier, so I think keeping that is important to encourage sedimentation in the pond. But we haven't really talked through some of the like aesthetic components of the weir.
Okay.
It's on our radar first. It's making sure we can find a modification that's structurally, sound. Thinking through the cost implications of that, and then I think aesthetics will roll in to follow.
Okay.
So something we can keep in mind.
Yeah, I'm not saying take the metal weir out, I'm just saying hide it,
Yeah, we also don't have, there's no kind of view shed impacts from this view,
Okay,
which is nice.
okay.
Anything else from Ms. Sermon? Minute. Well, thanks so much. Good report.
All right.
Good report.
Mr. Heyman, we'll look to you next for the next discussion item.
Good evening, President. Good evening, President White and managers. I wasn't sure if we were going to do the administrator's report first, but this
I ought to have done that, I just realized.
works
Could I-
great. Following our September 12th board meeting, we provided a pretty extensive background on the status of the project, the redevelopment and restoration, in preparation for an anticipated joint meeting with the city and Hopkins, or with the city and Alatus. We hosted that meeting the following Wednesday, so last Wednesday, September 18th. It was a productive meeting with our partners, I would say. I think it seemingly has sparked some action, and as such, I think in advance of the forthcoming November 1st purchase and sale agreement termination date, we would recommend the board enter into closed session to further discuss and define its position as those negotiations continue.
Thank you. Before we do that, I'll turn to Mr. Whisker for his report.
Oh, okay.
Surprise, surprise.
That's okay.
Boom.
Well, in keeping with, I think, the spirit of tonight, I've got a number of reports, so it might be a little bit lengthy. I'll try and keep it to highlights so that we can get back to regular programming on 325 Blake Road. And I guess to start off with, unfortunately, I heard some sad news today that Larry Blackstead recently passed away.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so for those of you that might not know, Larry, he was a longtime county community work staff person. He was the chair of Three Rivers Park District, longtime advisor of Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and a good friend. And he was invited early on, 2010, 2011, in our work in the Greenway to discuss community works planning. And that ended up becoming a precursor to our development of balanced urban ecology. So from there, he was involved in our Greenway and 325 Lake Road work. And I think as we've done with other valued partners, I'd recommend to bring a resolution forward acknowledging his contributions. Just heard about this today. I haven't reached out to Rita, his wife, but it sounds like there's a memorial at Park Tavern this Sunday. So when I get information for those of you that know, I'll push that along, and
Good.
maybe I'll see some of you there.
He did that big project in North Minneapolis. What do they call that?
Humboldt?
Humboldt, yeah, which was really exciting. Nobody thought it would be a success, but it was. And I think he was pretty instrumental on 29th Street too, wasn't he? Yeah. You know, it really impactful. But like any public servant that pushes too hard, he wears out his welcome. Because he kind of pushed policymakers beyond where they wanted to be on a lot of stuff. So, you know, he didn't get the credit that he should have gotten when he retired. But just a marvelous civil servant.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
Yeah, so kind of a sad lead off to the administrator's report, but I know many of you knew him, so just wanted to pass that along if you hadn't heard. Obviously, water levels is usually on the admin reports. Started really, really dry in March, and then we had the fourth wettest April to June on record. Put that briefly in perspective, I was looking at the DNR website today. On August 28th, we had accumulated 31 inches of rain. The wettest year ever recorded was 1892, which on that date had received 31 inches of rain. Since then, we've had an exceptionally dry September. If we don't get 0.2 of an inch by Monday, it's going to be the driest September ever recorded in the Twin Cities. So it's sort of been a tale of two seasons. In terms of water levels, because we've had a dry month, we're at 928.86 on the lake, so we are tracking towards closure, probably in the month of October, and then we'll see what happens with precip as we move towards winter season. Down in the creek, things are pretty mellow, 75 cubic feet per second down in Minneapolis. Couple project updates. All the projects I'm working on are going really, really well. Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk. We recently met with the City of St. Louis Park and our boardwalk contractor, JTS, to discuss the next steps in the review of the alternatives that they've proposed to correct defective work. It was a constructive meeting. We had agreement that following a field installation test where they go out and demonstrate for SRF, our engineer of record, and the city, that they can implement these fixes practically, that SRF would move from conditional acceptance of what's been submitted on engineering to approval. That would allow changes to be integrated into the contract documents, and the city is viewing that as a trigger point to then get to city approval of the alternatives to building codes. So that was constructive. We spent quite a bit of time discussing what it would take logistically to uncover, inspect, direct the corrections, make the fixes, certify the corrections, and then move on through segments of the boardwalk. So that was constructive too. Following the meeting, the contractor, his attorney have maintained open dialogue with me and our attorney Chuck Holtman. They continue to express concerns on the behalf of JTS with regards to the cost to implement the fixes in the field test. Recently asked for, as of today, a full accounting of liquidated damages that they've been accruing, engineering and legal costs, which we're assembling. And just in the spirit of transparency, the contractors continue to state he believes there's some level of shared responsibility for the defective work. Through the entire process, including most recently today, we have said we've invited them to present facts or records, and that we would consider those in good faith, but otherwise we're operating under the contract and the project wasn't built according to the plans or specifications or the contract, and it's been 16 months since the defective work was identified, and we haven't commenced action yet. Meanwhile, I think the district's expended a lot of time, effort, relational capital in getting to this point where the corrections could actually be implemented. So we're really in the stage of encouraging JTS to move forward with the field test and then get into implementation this winter season, and I'm hoping to have a clear path forward in the next week. So constructive in the fact that we're at a point where we could get approvals, and then we're working with the contractor to figure out what it's going to take to get them into the field and actually do the work. Next up, campus improvements. So I had previously reported that we had a memorialized verbal agreement with our neighbor in writing that we were designing the driveway reconstruction in conformance with county city code. We're not narrowing it beyond its current narrowest dimension, which is something they've been concerned with. Our neighbor, Campbell CV's, estimated their ability to contribute cash between $25,000 and $30,000. Looks to be that the actual construction costs, based on engineer's estimate, are around $35,000 for their participation. I'd consider that striking distance of an agreement. And then they asked us to draft a more sensible easement that was narrower in dimension, reflected the road, and didn't give either party veto authority over what we're doing on our respective properties, which we've done. I distributed the easement with follow-up next steps that we need to crank through in October in order to keep this in next year's budget. And I think their initial reaction, since they don't deal with this stuff day to day, is, wow, that's a lot to think about. And the easement's pretty, it's a legal document. So they're really interested in what they call the simple and economical approach, which I think is what we've proposed. And they've asked me to engage directly with their attorney. So that gave me a little bit of pause and concern. So we exchanged some voicemails today, and I reinforced the points of agreement that we already reached and put in writing and that I'd relayed to the board. And I did hear back late this afternoon. Their attorney is their point person now. Again, need to work through them, but they remain really confident we're going to reach agreement. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm hoping that we'll make the progress we need to get to a countersigned term sheet. That's my goal in October, so that as we approach the November Truth in Taxation meeting for our budget, we can make sort of a go, no-go decision on keeping those numbers inside the 2025 budget. President White mentioned, after an introductory meeting with Commissioner Edelson, we met today with Samantha, Mike, and her policy aides to walk the preserve. We discussed our 15 years of work in the Greenway. She asked a lot of really thoughtful questions about what does it take to work in partnership like this, and she kept asking Mike, how do you stay motivated when it takes 15 years to deliver results? I thought those are really great, kind of insightful questions. So we're really focused on the joy of the process and these mini milestones that it takes to deliver visionary work.
He keeps his drinking under control, too.
Yeah, that's impressive. She had some good questions, and we had good discussion about the status of 325 Blake Road. I think she supports our vision, the water first vision, and wants to see our public realm investments move into the ground as quickly as possible and not be held up by the development. So we're tracking there. And then we talked about upcoming engagement that the commissioner's hosting around aquatic invasive species funding and programming, as it relates to the county's program, which is funded by legislative dollars, about $300,000 a year, and how that relates to Lake Minnetonka. And it sounds like they're having a gathering of legislators, along with stakeholders, Mr. Jabor from LMCD, Joe Schneider from the Christmas Lake Association on Monday. And I've been invited to participate in that, and that's a I'm juggling that with a commitment I also made to Mayor Marvin Johnson of Independence to present at the Farm Bureau about rainfall received this year and dam operations and approach to water management. So there's a couple points of kind of community-facing engagement Monday afternoon and evening.
Is that a charter boat meeting?
No, I think it's actually at they haven't sent out a calendar invite, so we're a little bit light on details, Manager Olson, but I think it's at the Shorewood City Hall or Shorewood Community Center.
Okay, thanks.
And I can send out details when we have them. I asked for some of those today, participants, agenda, that kind of thing. It's sort of a casual, open house, unguided discussion is the way it was built, so we'll see. Some conferences and points of communication. We've been accepted to present at this year's Water Resource Conference, or Brian Beck has to present findings from our 6 Mile cart management work. Also understand that the University of Minnesota is presenting second round findings on the Nokomis surface and groundwater investigation. They picked up where we left off, trying to delineate specific areas of peat and perched groundwater. I've reached out to the University of Minnesota lead and asked them to provide a briefing to the multi-agency technical team. So Minneapolis, Park Board, County, DNR, USGS. So we're going to try and get an understanding of what they're presenting before October 15th. I got a call from Jan Voigt, Executive Director of Minnesota Watersheds today. She's asked for a tentative commitment, which we haven't necessarily formally provided yet, to be the host of the Minnesota Watershed Summer Tour in 2027. So it's a couple of years. They're giving us plenty of lead time this time. So I think we'll probably be able to accommodate that, and just wanted to get that on your radar. I think our hope is that we'd be able to showcase 325 Blake Road and all the greenway work, a fixed boardwalk, and all that kind of stuff by then. And then in front of you and distributed by Samantha is the Big River article. Minnehaha Creek was featured in the Big River magazine as a regional asset. The story, if you've read it, profiles how Minnehaha Creek just sits in the regional landscape and winds its way through communities, how it's a regional recreational resource. There's some pretty good profile of our work in the Greenway Methodist Hospital. It talks about dam operations and more, all the way down to Minneapolis. So I thought that came out pretty well. And kudos to Samantha for, I think she engaged on that before she was in her current position. I noticed it said engagement coordinator in the citation, so that's been in the works for a while. And unless there's questions, that's what I have for the administrator's report.
Thank you.
And her title now is?
Outreach manager.
Now, Mr. Heyman, we're ready for closed session?
Chair White, managers, I think Lewis could lead us
Could
into
you
closed session if the board so chooses.
Thank you. Would you state the reason, Mr. Smith?
Madam President, we would recommend going to closed session for the board's purpose of considering the terms for the sale of 325 Oak Road.
Thank you. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando? By roll call, voting on going into closed session, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Olson?
Aye.
Miller?
Aye.
Sando?
Aye.
Loftus? Aye. Hedgemati?
Aye.
And White says aye. May I get a motion to go back into open session?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell, voting on that by roll call, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Aye.
Olson? Miller?
Aye.
Sando?
Aye.
Loftus? Aye. Sherry White, Arun?
Aye.
Okay, and Sherry, aye. We are in open session, and we are adjourned.